Pilot refuses to believe black woman is a flight inspector, fails the check, and loses his license. A swirl of tension and expectation clung to the humid air on an early August morning at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Flights roared overhead, ground crews hurried about, and a certain pilot named Mitchell Rourke wore confidence as if he owned the tarmac. Everyone in the terminal recognized his swagger, his decades of experience, turning him into a legend among those who dreamed of flying the skies. Yet beneath that veneer of aviator shades and polished epaulettes, arrogance simmered. Little did he know that day would deliver an unexpected visitor, a black woman, prepared to test his skills and, in many ways, his character. This would be no ordinary check ride. Mitchell Rourke was well known among his peers. At 45 years old, he was an experienced pilot who flew primarily for a major domestic airline, let's call it Westward Air. He was the sort of man who thrived on recognition. He strolled through airports in his crisp uniform, and gate agents spoke his name with reverence. Junior flight attendants eyed him in cautious admiration. Rumor had it that he once landed a Boeing 737 with only one engine functioning during a severe thunderstorm in Denver. The Federal Aviation Administration had commended him for his calmness and skill under pressure. From then on, he looked in the mirror each morning and saw a hero. But, like many whose confidence soared too high, Mitchell believed he was invincible. He loved the spotlight, and he sometimes ventured into the realm of condescension with those he deemed less experienced or less knowledgeable. When Mitchell spoke, he assumed others listened in rapt attention. He was known for lecturing younger pilots about the realities of commercial flight, describing in detail how to manage crosswinds, how to handle in-flight mechanical issues, or even how to properly greet passengers over the intercom. Most of the time, they listened, nodding politely, as few dared challenge his authority. Yet the airline rumor mill is a powerful thing. Whispers circulated that Mitchell's confidence overshadowed thoroughness. Maintenance checklists sometimes became routine formalities rather than crucial procedures, and some co-pilots complained that he dismissed their concerns too readily. Still, Mitchell had never faced a direct confrontation with an inspector that threatened his career. He treated FAA checks like minor inconveniences. He had passed them before, he'd pass them again. Life continued as always until the day it didn't. As summer progressed, word spread that the airline was instituting random on-the-spot checks. The FAA had launched a renewed campaign to ensure pilot proficiency, especially regarding new procedural updates for runway safety. Rumors claimed these new checks included a special team of inspectors who traveled incognito. Mitchell heard about them but dismissed the fuss. After all, he had perfect flight hours, impeccable landings, and a glowing record. He was immune, so he thought. One afternoon, he was in the pilot's lounge, half listening to the chatter about someone who had apparently failed one of these random checks just days ago. A young pilot, no older than 30, had been singled out by an inspector who was rumored to be extremely strict. Mitchell rolled his eyes at the rumor and resumed reading the sports section. He believed these stories never applied to him. If an inspector walked onto his plane, he'd show them the same skill he'd displayed for over 2 decades. End of discussion, but the lounge talk persisted. People described the inspector as a tall, black woman with eyes that see right through you. Others said she was friendly but exacting, expecting rigorous adherence to rules. A small band of older pilots scoffed, asserting that they'd never even seen her. Junior co-pilots who were more anxious about these checks devoured every piece of gossip. Mitchell, for his part, found the descriptions unbelievable. Rarely did he see female inspectors, and almost never did he see a black woman in that role. He waved the rumors off as idle chatter meant to scare novices. On that fateful day in August, Mitchell arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor before dawn. The sky glowed lavender, and the desert sun hinted at the scorching heat that would soon descend. Mitchell was scheduled to fly Flight 357 from Phoenix to Seattle, a route he had flown hundreds of times. The flight manifest included his usual co-pilot, Trevor Moore, a mild-mannered man about 5 years younger than Mitchell. Trevor was efficient and by the book, which sometimes irritated Mitchell, who liked to rely on experience and gut instincts. As they performed pre-flight checks in the cockpit, Trevor was systematically running through the checklist. Mitchell drummed his fingers on the yoke, glancing outside at the desert horizon. "We've done this a million times, Trevor," he said, exasperated. "Everything here is routine. Let's not waste precious time." Trevor gave him a patient look. Better to be certain. The FAA's new guidelines. Mitchell cut him off with a dismissive wave. Yes, new guidelines. I've been flying planes longer than those guidelines have even existed. Trust me, this bird's in perfect shape. Trevor sighed but continued, following each step diligently. He respected Mitchell's experience, but that didn't erase the knot of anxiety in his chest. There had been a subtle change in the atmosphere lately, a sense that something was about to happen. Trevor wanted everything above reproach. But of course Mitchell was the captain. What he said typically went. Passengers started boarding. It was the standard bustle of overhead bins being filled, seat belts clicking, and flight attendants making announcements. The Arizona heat blazed, and Trevor reminded Mitchell to keep an eye on engine temperatures during taxi. Mitchell rolled his eyes but complied. The boarding door was about to close when a flight attendant, Harriet, approached the cockpit, her expression carefully neutral. "Captain, we've got a last-minute passenger in first class." "She has special instructions," Harriet said quietly. "She showed me some documentation, something about an inspection." Instantly, Mitchell sat up straighter in his seat. "Inspection? For what exactly?" "Well," Harriet said, her voice lowered. "She said she's with the FAA, and that this flight is designated for a random check ride." Trevor's eyes darted to Mitchell. The famous random checks had finally found them. Mitchell, for a moment, felt a swirl of annoyance. "Must be some new inspector. Fine, whatever. Let's get this over with. Did she say anything else?" Harriet hesitated. She asked for you specifically. Wants to watch the flight from the jump seat." Mitchell's brows knitted together. A thin wave of apprehension prickled at the edge of his mind. "All right," he said stiffly. "Send her in." When the cabin door slid open to admit the inspector, Mitchell's immediate reaction was surprise. There stood a tall black woman, maybe in her early 40s, wearing a neatly pressed business suit. Her FAA badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. Her stance was poised, and she emanated quiet authority. There was no doubt she had come prepared. "Good morning, Captain Rourke," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Danielle Carter, FAA Flight Inspector. I'll be accompanying you on today's flight." Her voice was calm, but resonated with quiet confidence. Mitchell blinked. He had half expected a mid-50s white man with a receding hairline what his past inspectors had looked like. He'd certainly never encountered a black woman in this role. For a moment, he was too startled to respond, but he clasped her hand, offering a tight smile. Trevor looked between them. "I'm co-pilot Trevor Moore. Pleased to meet you, Miss Carter." "Pleasure, Mr. Moore," Danielle responded, offering a polite nod. Mitchell cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "So you're the inspector everyone's been buzzing about." She raised an eyebrow but kept her tone level. "I'm not sure about that, Captain, but I am an inspector, and I like to think I do my job diligently." He smirked, gesturing for her to take the jump seat. "Let's get going then. We're scheduled to push back in 5 minutes." Once Danielle strapped into the jump seat, the cockpit felt decidedly cramped. It didn't help that Mitchell's ego took up plenty of space. He tried to focus on the standard procedures, verifying the flight plan, checking the instruments, ensuring flaps were set for takeoff. Trevor, however, noticed that Mitchell seemed more on edge than usual. He was more abrupt in his speech, less tolerant of any suggestion from Trevor. Perhaps Mitchell wanted to prove his superiority in front of this unexpected evaluator. Danielle observed everything with keen interest, making occasional notes on a small pad in her lap. She asked a few procedural questions as they taxied to the runway. Mitchell responded curtly, always concluding with something like, "I've done this for years," or "That's what real flying experience teaches you." Danielle merely nodded politely, allowing him his space. But beneath the surface, tension crackled like static electricity. They took off smoothly. The Boeing 737 lifting into the light, splashed Arizona sky. Mitchell guided the aircraft through a standard climb-out procedure, all the while rattling off altitudes, headings, and flap settings. Trevor assisted as usual, though he subtly kept an eye on Danielle, wondering what she was jotting down. Once they reached cruising altitude, Danielle began a more direct line of questioning. She asked about emergency procedures, about how Mitchell would handle specific rare malfunctions, or how he stayed current on the airline's updated safety bulletins. He responded, but there was a hint of impatience in his tone. Several times he reminded her of his years of experience, his thousands of hours logged. Trevor cringed inwardly. He knew these checks relied on calm, thorough responses. Inspectors cared more about demonstration than boasting. Danielle never raised her voice. She was professional, almost overly polite, but her questions were pointed. She was clearly testing Mitchell's depth of knowledge. Mitchell's disbelief that a black woman, someone he'd never seen in any prior inspections, could be testing his competence, simmered just under his consciousness. He didn't articulate it, but the way he addressed her felt slightly condescending. He spoke slowly, explaining certain flight principles as if she might not fully understand them. Trevor noticed and wished Mitchell would rein in his tone, but the captain seemed oblivious or simply unwilling to adjust. About an hour into the flight, Danielle tested the waters by requesting a simulated scenario. "Captain, how would you handle a partial hydraulic failure on approach to Seattle?" "Let's imagine your left inboard spoiler isn't responding." Mitchell shrugged. "I'd manage the plane as I always do, by the book. These hypothetical scenarios can be found in the manual. If it happens, I'd just follow procedure, not complicated." Danielle tilted her head. "Could you talk me through the steps in that manual? It's part of the standard check." He gave a mirthless laugh. "You want me to recite them, word for word?" "Not word for word, but I need to ensure you're fluent in the exact procedure, especially the approach and landing considerations. It's best practice for an inspector to verify a pilot's immediate recall. That's the FAA standard." Sensing the tension, Trevor jumped in. "We'd start by notifying ATC of a possible hydraulic issue, then consult the quick reference handbook for the appropriate checklist. Our approach speed might need to be adjusted to account for incomplete spoiler deployment." Mitchell waved his hand to silence Trevor. "I know this, Trevor," he snapped, then turned to Danielle. "Look, Miss Carter, I assure you I can handle any emergency. That's what real flight experience is about, not reciting chapters like a parrot." He believed this show of bravado would impress her, but her expression remained neutral. She made another note on her pad. Trevor sensed she was unimpressed. During the flight, it became clear Danielle was cross-checking more than just Mitchell's theoretical knowledge. She watched his every action, whether he followed checklists fully or omitted steps. The more Mitchell felt scrutinized, the more defensive he became. He fiddled with knobs in a rushed manner, sometimes forgetting to confirm readouts. Trevor quietly compensated, verifying everything to avoid mistakes. But Danielle noticed. At one point, Danielle asked, "Captain, When do you plan to begin the top of descent for an optimal approach into Seattle, given today's weather and wind patterns? Mitchell frowned slightly. Normally, he'd rely on the flight management computer FMC for a calculated top of descent, but sometimes he liked to do it manually. He threw out a number. We'll start descending around 130 nautical miles out. Trevor did a quick mental calculation and realized that might be a bit early given the calm winds. He opened his mouth to politely correct, but Mitchell shot him a warning glance. Danielle looked from Mitchell to Trevor, sensing the discord. She gently probed, "Don't you think that's slightly earlier than standard for these conditions?" According to the flight plan, the recommended top of descent is around 120 miles from the threshold, given our cruise altitude and the low winds. Where did 130 come from? Mitchell's jaw tightened. From experience. These charts don't account for every real-world nuance. But the plane's instruments began to reveal that 130 might indeed lead to a longer, slightly less efficient descent, forcing them to level off prematurely. Was it a huge error? No. But it was a sign that Mitchell was less meticulous than he claimed. Trevor watched Danielle jot more notes. The mood in the cockpit turned icy. Shortly before they began their descent, Mitchell broke a tense silence. "So, Miss Carter," he said in a light tone that belied his frustration, "tell me how you ended up as an FAA inspector." "You're... not exactly what I expected." He tried to phrase it casually, but the insinuation was obvious. He was surprised that a black woman was there to evaluate him. Danielle paused, measuring her words. "I started in the Air Force," she said simply. "Flew C-130s for years, then moved into civilian aviation. The FAA recruited me for my experience in advanced training and operational audits." Mitchell blinked. "Air Force, huh?" He forced a half smile. "I guess that explains why you know your way around an airplane." She kept her tone even. "Yes, Captain, it does. I've logged nearly 5,000 hours on military transports and specialized missions. After that, a 737 is just another bird." Trevor silently marveled at Danielle's calm. Mitchell, for once, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. He coughed and adjusted the heading on the autopilot. "Well then, impressive. Always nice to have more diversity in aviation." His words echoed with an awkwardness that made Trevor cringe. As they neared Seattle, storm clouds gathered. The forecast had predicted moderate turbulence, but the system had intensified. Mitchell directed the flight attendants to prepare the cabin early. Turbulence announcements were made, seatbelt signs illuminated, dark clouds swallowed the horizon. Trevor began analyzing the approach plates for Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, coordinating with air traffic control. The tower reported wind shear advisories. Mitchell's competitive instincts flared. Such conditions were an opportunity to demonstrate his fabled skill. He aimed to show Danielle that he could land this plane better than any textbook procedure. But Danielle, from the jump seat, calmly requested that they adhere strictly to the recommended approach guidelines, especially with reported wind shear. Mitchell's lips thinned. He gave her a short nod, but his eyes sparkled with the arrogance that had fueled his career for so long. Trevor glanced anxiously at the weather radar. This storm looked serious, a swirling mess of clouds and wind that could test the best of pilots. Trevor quietly reminded Mitchell about the recommended approach speed increments for wind shear. "We might need to add 10 knots to our approach speed," he said. Mitchell gave a curt nod, but it was unclear if he truly internalized the suggestion. Danielle took note of their approach briefing, verifying that it matched FAA guidelines. She reminded them that in the event of a wind shear warning, they should be prepared to go around. As they commenced the final approach, the turbulence became relentless. The aircraft jolted up and down, seatbelt signs flashed overhead, and the wingtips seemed to slice through the dark, churning air. Trevor carefully monitored the instruments. Danielle watched Mitchell's every move, her expression intent. Over the radio, the tower called out a wind shear advisory right on final. Trevor braced himself. Normally, a prudent pilot might break off and circle for another approach or wait out the wind shear. Mitchell, however, was determined to land. He believed a go-around would suggest weakness or ineptitude in front of the inspector. So he pressed on. The plane slammed downward with a fierce downdraft, causing warning alarms to ring out. Trevor's hand hovered near the throttles, ready to push them forward for a go-around. "Captain, maybe we should," Trevor began. "No, I've got this," Mitchell insisted. Danielle's voice cut in firmly. "Captain, a wind shear escape maneuver might be necessary." Mitchell ignored her. He wrestled with the controls, overcorrecting with the throttle. The aircraft jolted sideways. The co-pilot let out a sharp breath. Danielle looked tense for the first time. At the last moment, the plane stabilized just enough to cross the threshold, landing hard. Passengers gasped as the tires squealed, screeching across the wet runway. Trevor felt a surge of relief as they touched down, though it was a jarring, unpleasant landing. Mitchell forced a triumphant grin. He'd done it. But Danielle's expression held no admiration. She scribbled furiously on her pad, lips set in a thin line. Once they taxied to the gate, Mitchell tried to pretend everything was normal. He instructed Trevor to begin the usual post-flight checks, then turned to Danielle with a smug smile. "That was quite a ride, wasn't it? But we made it. No harm done." She set her pen down. "Captain Rourke, I'd like to speak with you in a quieter space once we disembark," she said. Calmly, though her eyes flashed with pent-up frustration, Trevor glanced at Mitchell, then looked away. This was not a standard reaction from an inspector. Usually they gave a few remarks, perhaps some minor suggestions, but not a private, serious conversation. Passengers filed off the plane, some of them glancing into the cockpit with relief that they were on solid ground again. Mitchell gave them a reassuring smile, though it was forced. Finally, Harriet, the flight attendant, poked her head in. "All passengers off, Captain." "Want me to lock up?" Mitchell nodded. "Yes, and Miss Carter will exit with us." They stepped out onto the jet bridge. The air smelled of wet pavement, and a grey drizzle misted the windows. Danielle pulled Mitchell aside, Trevor trailing uncertainly. "Captain Rourke," Danielle began, "your performance this flight was," she searched for the right word, "concerning. You've displayed a pattern of ignoring standard procedures and failing to follow certain mandatory checklists. Your approach into Seattle in the face of a documented winds, here advisory went against multiple safety protocols. I'm going to have to document these findings thoroughly in my report." Mitchell stiffened. "Are you questioning my skill? I landed safely. That's what matters." Her tone remained professional. Safety is paramount, and ignoring a recommended go-around is exactly the kind of risky behavior we aim to prevent. Furthermore, your disregard for procedural checks is troubling. He opened his mouth to protest, but found himself uncharacteristically short on words. This wasn't just a pass-fail situation. This was an inspector who could ground him if she deemed him unsafe. As if reading his mind, Danielle added, "I am compelled by the FAA's guidelines to recommend a more comprehensive re-evaluation of your qualifications. My role is not to punish, it's to ensure the safety of passengers and crew. Let's set up a debriefing with your chief pilot and the FAA Oversight Office." Trevor's heart sank. Mitchell, for once, looked rattled. Danielle, having said her piece, pivoted and walked away. The only sound in the empty jet bridge was the whir of the ventilation system. Mitchell stormed into the pilot lounge, fuming. Trevor followed, uncertain how to diffuse the tension. A couple of other pilots looked up, curious about the commotion, but quickly returned to their business when they saw Mitchell's dark glare. "That woman," Mitchell spat, tossing his flight bag onto a chair, "thinks she can ground me because she walked in here with an FAA badge. Ridiculous." Trevor tried to keep a calm demeanor. "She's doing her job, Captain. I know it's stressful, but—" Mitchell spun around. "Don't you start, Trevor. She's got some kind of agenda. All these new inspectors, especially her, she's just hungry to make a name for herself. That's all it is." Trevor said nothing. He could see Mitchell's pride was wounded. But deep inside, he knew Danielle Carter was not out for blood. She was simply documenting what she'd seen. And what she saw must have been alarming. Mitchell paced. "I've been flying these planes for over 20 years. I've made landings in weather 10 times worse than that little squall. And she has the nerve to suggest I'm not up to standards?" Trevor's eyes flicked to the floor. Mitchell was in denial about how close they'd come to a seriously hazardous landing. "She's a legitimate inspector. She had every right to be there," Trevor said quietly. "And it wasn't just the landing. The checklists, the approach calculations, you kept brushing them aside." Mitchell dismissed him with an irritated wave. "She's out of her depth. That's the real story. She probably doesn't even know half of what I do." At that moment, Harriet walked in, giving them a quick smile. She sensed the tension and quickly excused herself to gather her belongings. Mitchell rubbed his temples. "I need to calm down," he muttered. "I'm sure the chief pilot will see reason. He knows my record." Later that afternoon, Mitchell found himself in the office of Captain Raymond Gould, the airline's chief pilot and old friend with whom Mitchell had shared many flight decks in their younger days. Raymond, a tall man with thinning grey hair and a somber expression, closed his office door, exuding a sense of gravity. "Mitchell," he began in a measured voice, "I just got off the phone with Danielle Carter from the FAA. She's not just any random inspector. She's part of a specialized team focusing on advanced auditing techniques. From her perspective, there were serious deficiencies today." Mitchell bristled. "Ray, you know me. My track record is spotless." Ray sighed. "It was. But apparently you challenged wind shear advisories, neglected certain checklists, and displayed an attitude that alarmed her. She's recommending an immediate retest and possibly a suspension until you've demonstrated competence in a flight simulator and passed a formal check ride. If you fail that, you could lose your license." Mitchell's eyes flashed. "This is insane. I landed that plane just fine. People overreact. I've done more challenging landings in Denver or Salt Lake City with no issues." Ray tapped a pen against his desk, choosing his words carefully. "Mitchell, we've known each other a long time, but I've seen your approach to safety slip from thoroughness to complacency. Maybe you rely too much on your gut. The FAA wants strict adherence to protocols. And you know, the slightest hint that a pilot disregards standard operating procedures can end a career. I need to know if you're willing to comply." Mitchell stared him down. "Comply with what? A dog and pony show for an FAA inspector who doesn't believe I know how to fly?" Ray's tone turned stern. "That inspector is Danielle Carter, and I've personally seen her background. She's more than qualified, and she has more influence with the FAA than you realize. If you want to keep your wings, you'll follow through. Schedule the simulator test, pass the check ride, or face indefinite suspension." Outside, the day's drizzle had turned to steady rain. Mitchell left the office feeling a roiling mix of anger, disbelief, and simmering resentment. The unthinkable was happening. His arrogance and prejudice had come face to face with the relentless machinery of the FAA, embodied in a woman he couldn't intimidate. Mitchell tried to rally support from fellow pilots. He told them how the infamous Danielle Carter had singled him out, determined to sabotage a veteran pilot's career. A few of them nodded sympathetically, but some were cautious. They'd heard rumors about that landing. They knew the FAA was stepping up enforcement. They also knew that Mitchell had a habit of cutting corners. Still, Mitchell found some who agreed to speak on his behalf. They cited his heroic moments, saving an aircraft from mechanical failure, expertly navigating tricky crosswinds, or volunteering to train younger pilots on night approaches. The problem was that Danielle's observations weren't about Mitchell's flair, they were about his daily diligence or lack thereof. Trevor, for his part, remained quiet. Mitchell cornered him one afternoon, asking, "You'll testify that I'm a safe pilot, right? You were there. That wind shear was not as bad as they claimed, was it?" Trevor swallowed hard. "Captain, it was severe. We had a direct tower warning. You disregarded it. I can't lie about that." Mitchell's jaw clenched. He turned away, muttering something about loyalty. But Trevor refused to budge. He had his own integrity and career to consider. Over the next few days, the flight schedule advanced without Mitchell. He was placed on administrative leave, pending his retest. Meanwhile, Danielle Carter went on with her duties, inspecting other pilots, verifying other flights. But the rumor mill had gone into overdrive. Everyone now had an opinion on Danielle and Mitchell. Some insisted she was too harsh. Others argued Mitchell had become reckless. A certain tension brewed in the corridors of Westward Air. Alone at home, Mitchell found himself restless. His wife, Cynthia, tried to comfort him. She'd never seen him so agitated. "What are you going to do?" she asked gently as she prepared dinner one night. He stared out the window. "I have to pass that retest. That's what I have to do. But it galls me that I'm forced to prove myself to her." Cynthia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever your feelings, you need to set aside that pride and show them you're the pilot you claim to be." He sighed. "I don't trust her. I suspect she has it out for me." Cynthia gave him a sad smile. "Or maybe she's just doing her job, Mitchell. You told me once that flying is about constant learning, constant vigilance. Maybe you lost sight of that." He didn't reply, but her words hung heavily in the quiet of their kitchen. A week later, Mitchell walked into the training center. A hush fell among the trainees as he passed. He was a legend, after all but a legend under scrutiny. The simulator was set up with an FAA observer, one of Danielle's colleagues, and Captain Gould presented to oversee. Danielle herself was not there, but Mitchell sensed her invisible presence in every checklist. He felt a burning need to prove he was still the best pilot in the room. He strapped into the simulator's left seat. The artificial cockpit was a near-perfect replica of a Boeing 737. The screens ahead displayed digital runways, weather conditions, and all the variables an actual pilot would encounter. The FAA observer, a meticulous man named Dennis Reyes, sat behind him, notes at the ready. "All right, Captain Rourke," Dennis said. "We'll run through a series of scenarios. You're expected to demonstrate correct procedures for each. Let's start with a straightforward takeoff and climb out of LAX. Then we'll introduce a hydraulic failure at cruising altitude." Mitchell nodded curtly, forcing himself to stay composed. The simulator roared to life as he advanced the throttles. The realistic rumble filled his ears, and the digital runway stretched out in front of him. For the first scenario, everything went smoothly. He called out the speeds, rotated the aircraft, climbed out, performed all the correct after takeoff checks. Dennis watched impassively. Captain Gould nodded in approval from the background. Mitchell felt a small surge of confidence. Then the simulator beeped, indicating a hydraulic system malfunction. Instantly, the computer simulated a pressure drop, triggering caution lights. Mitchell's heart thumped. He had to recall every step from the quick reference handbook. This was exactly the scenario Danielle had asked him about in flight. He had brushed her off then, but now he had to demonstrate mastery. He pulled out the manual checklist. He had the steps memorized, but forced himself to methodically read them off to avoid skipping anything. Slowly, systematically, he isolated the failure and followed the correct procedures. The plane remained under control. He coordinated with simulated ATC, declared an emergency, and prepared for a diversion. Dennis checked boxes on his form. Captain Gould's expression was neutral, but not disapproving. So far, so good. The final scenario was a wind shear event on approach. The simulator mimicked sudden changes in wind direction and speed, just as had happened in Seattle. This time, Mitchell faced a choice: go around or force a landing. The standard procedure was to initiate a winds here escape maneuver if the warnings were strong enough. The simulator's alarm began to blare. Wind shear, wind shear. Mitchell recalled how he had defied the same advisory in real life, but now, under the watchful eyes of the FAA observer, he had to demonstrate proper procedure. He braced himself and pushed the throttles forward, initiating a go-around. The aircraft roared as it climbed away from the runway, fighting the simulated microburst. He followed the standard pitch angle, all the while calling out the procedure steps. Eventually, the plane stabilized at a safe altitude. When the scenario ended, the simulator froze on the final screen. Dennis set his pen down. He looked up at Mitchell and nodded slowly. "Captain Rourke, you executed that well. That's the recommended procedure. Good job." A wave of relief flooded Mitchell. He had done exactly what he should have done in Seattle, but a flicker of regret tugged at him. He realized that in the real situation, he had chosen poorly, risking lives for the sake of his ego. After the simulator session, Mitchell waited outside while Dennis and Captain Gould deliberated. 20 minutes later, they called him back in. Dennis spoke first. "Captain Rourke, your simulator performance met the required standards. You demonstrated you do know the correct procedures for abnormal and emergency situations. Based on this, I'll recommend that your license be restored, pending a final interview with Miss Carter and the local FAA manager." Mitchell felt a heavy weight lift from his chest, but Dennis's next words brought him back down. "However, we have concerns about your in-flight judgment and your attitude towards standard procedures. Passing the simulator is one thing, but the FAA and your airline need reassurance that you'll comply with protocols consistently in actual operations. We want you to undergo additional training and a line check with an FAA inspector aboard. Only after that will your privileges be fully reinstated." Mitchell bristled. "More training? How long?" Captain Gould stepped in, voice quiet but firm. "As long as it takes for everyone to be convinced you're safe, Mitchell. That might be a week, maybe 2, or longer if you resist." Mitchell inhaled deeply. He wanted to argue, but the memory of that meeting with Danielle Carter and the near-botched Seattle landing hovered in his mind. Pride or not, he had no choice. He nodded, murmuring, "Understood." 3 days later, Mitchell found himself in a small conference room at the FAA's local office. Danielle Carter was there, seated behind a desk with a laptop open, along with a senior FAA manager named Robert Helm. Mitchell sat in a chair facing them. He felt a prickling discomfort in the pit of his stomach, quite unlike the cocky confidence he used to wear like a badge. Danielle remained polite but distant. She outlined the concerns she had documented: disregard for recommended procedures, hostility towards standard checklists, and an over-reliance on personal judgment during regulated operations. Mitchell tried to defend himself, but each time, Danielle countered with precise references to FAA regulations. Finally, Robert Helm stepped in. "Captain Rourke, Miss Carter's findings are serious, but not insurmountable. You did pass the simulator test. That proves you have the knowledge. But the real question is whether you'll consistently apply that knowledge. Miss Carter recommended additional oversight on your flights for a probationary period. If you demonstrate improvement, you keep your license. If you don't, your commercial pilot certificate could be revoked." Mitchell felt his blood turn to ice. Revocation was the ultimate nightmare, effectively ending his career. He swallowed. I understand, he said. I'll comply with the additional training. I just want to get back in the cockpit. Danielle nodded, her gaze unwavering. We want you to succeed, Captain Rourke. But more importantly, we need safety. The choice is yours. With that, the meeting concluded, leaving Mitchell with a swirl of relief and resentment. He had narrowly avoided immediate suspension, but the road ahead was not smooth. In the days that followed, Mitchell was assigned to ground school classes, refreshing his knowledge on CRM cockpit resource management and updated FAA regulations. Surrounded by younger pilots, he felt a twinge of humiliation. He was supposed to be an industry veteran, yet here he was, relearning basics. Some of them recognized him and whispered among themselves. Others seemed politely unaware. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session on cross-checking flight deck automation, Mitchell spotted Danielle Carter in the hallway. She was discussing something with another instructor. He hesitated, then approached her. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "can we speak for a moment?" She turned, arching an eyebrow. "Of course." They stepped aside. Mitchell took a breath. He wasn't accustomed to apologizing, but he knew it was necessary. "I just wanted to say, I might have let my pride get in the way. I've been flying a long time, and I realize I've become complacent. I took your presence as an affront, and I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." Danielle's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate that, Captain Rourke. This isn't personal, you know. It's about ensuring regulations are followed." He nodded. "I understand now." He paused, struggling for words. "And you've served our country, flown tough missions. I respect that. I'm sorry if I ever implied otherwise." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I hope you use this as a turning point rather than a setback." He gave a cautious nod. "I will." Eventually, Mitchell was permitted to return to the cockpit under probation. Danielle Carter arranged to be on board for his first flight back, along with a designated safety pilot seated in the jump seat. It was a short domestic hop from Los Angeles to San Francisco, a route known for heavy air traffic but usually mild weather. That morning, Mitchell arrived at the plane earlier than usual, carefully reviewing the flight plan. He triple-checked the maintenance logs, going through every detail with Trevor, who was once again his co-pilot. Trevor looked impressed, noticing Mitchell's newfound diligence. They conducted a thorough pre-flight briefing, meticulously covering what to do in case of any abnormalities. Passengers boarded. Danielle arrived, nodding politely as she took her seat behind them. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. She was there to observe. Takeoff was smooth. Mitchell maintained clear communication with Trevor, soliciting his input on altitudes and headings rather than dictating. He followed checklists rigorously, even the small items he once considered trivial. As they climbed out, Danielle noted his approach to the official procedures. At cruising altitude, a minor discrepancy appeared in one of the hydraulic pressure readings. In the past, Mitchell might have brushed it off, confident in his experience that it's no big deal. This time, he calmly referenced the manual and asked Trevor to keep an eye on the gauge. He alerted maintenance on the ground, explaining the anomaly and prepared for any needed contingency. Danielle's neutral face offered no clue, but Trevor gave him an approving nod. When they began descending into San Francisco, they encountered moderate crosswinds, nothing severe, but enough to test the approach. Mitchell set the recommended approach speed, verified flap settings, and repeated all call-outs. The landing was steady, within normal parameters. It lacked the flair of his legendary touches, but it was safe, precise, and exactly how the checklist demanded. After parking at the gate, Danielle quietly stood. "That was a good flight, Captain. I have some notes we'll discuss, but overall, you followed standard procedures consistently." Then she exited, leaving Mitchell with a faint sense of relief that maybe, just maybe, he had turned a corner. Over the next few weeks, Mitchell continued under close scrutiny, flying various routes with different FAA observers. Sometimes Danielle was there, sometimes it was another inspector. He missed the days when he roamed airports like a conquering hero, but he slowly came to realize how his self-image had been built on shaky ground. Every time he followed a procedure he used to skip, he remembered how quickly complacency could set in. The airline's rumors died down. New drama took center stage. Another pilot had an incident with a bird strike, and all eyes turned away from Mitchell's predicament. Life moved on, but for Mitchell, everything was different now. He recognized the privilege and arrogance that had clouded his judgment, and he began to see Danielle Carter as a professional who was simply holding him to the same standard as everyone else. One day, Mitchell received a call from Captain Gould, summoning him to another meeting. Mitchell feared something else had come up, maybe a complaint or a new negative finding. But when he arrived, he found Danielle Carter there as well, looking grave. Captain Gould's face was serious. "Mitchell, I asked Miss Carter to brief you on a separate matter. It appears that during a random audit, the FAA discovered potential falsification of certain maintenance logs on planes you flew." Mitchell's heart stuttered. "Falsification? By me?" "I never touched those logs," Danielle clarified. "Not by you personally. However, some of the ground crew logs appear to have your signature, likely rubber-stamped or auto-signed. This is part of a bigger problem the FAA is investigating. We suspect that certain technicians might have been skipping steps and forging signatures. We need your cooperation to verify which logs you actually signed." Mitchell was stunned. I always trust the mechanics. I had no idea they might have been forging my name." Danielle gave a grim nod. "We're not accusing you, Captain, but we need your help. If these forgeries are proven, it could mean major repercussions for Westward Air and the ground crew involved." Suddenly, Mitchell realized how precariously safety could be compromised by not just pilots, but also everyone in the chain of responsibility. He felt an unsettling chill. Maybe his arrogance wasn't the only danger in the system. A hidden network of shortcuts could lurk anywhere. Over the next few days, Mitchell found himself unexpectedly working alongside Danielle, examining old flight logs and maintenance records, checking for anomalies. They combed through digital and paper files, verifying signatures and cross-referencing dates. This unusual partnership felt surreal. Gone was the tension of him fighting to keep his license. Now they collaborated to unearth a deeper safety threat. During those hours in a cramped records room, Mitchell began to see Danielle not as an adversary, but as someone whose job required thoroughness. He realized that the system needed inspectors like her people who looked beyond reputations and forced adherence to regulations that saved lives. Their mutual goal became ensuring that no pilot would ever again unwittingly fly a plane with falsified maintenance logs. One late evening, while sifting through a stack of questionable documents, Mitchell paused. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to believe I was above all this. Procedures, checks, even inspectors. I was so certain I was the best pilot around. Now I'm seeing how fragile it all is. How one oversight can spell disaster." Danielle looked up from her laptop. "Aviation is a complex chain of trust. The moment any one of us decides we're above the rules, we weaken that chain." He nodded. "I guess I never truly saw it that way. But after this, I'll never view an inspector's job as meddling or unnecessary. If anything, I'm grateful you caught me before something worse happened." Danielle offered a small, genuine smile. "That's a good thing to hear, Captain." Eventually, the joint FAA and airline investigation uncovered multiple instances of log tampering. A handful of ground crew members were implicated, leading to suspensions and possible legal action. Westward Air launched an internal review, imposing stricter oversight on maintenance practices. Meanwhile, Mitchell continued his probationary period, carefully following every rule. Word spread that he had become an almost obsessive stickler for procedures, a walking handbook of regulations, something that baffled those who remembered his old ways. In an ironic twist, Mitchell's new approach earned him cautious praise from flight attendants, co-pilots, and even some passengers who noticed thoroughness in his announcements and checklists. He was no longer the flashy hero pilot. He was the safe, dependable, protocol-driven professional. And while part of him missed the swagger, he found a deeper pride in knowing he was respecting the responsibility entrusted to him. At long last, Mitchell's final check ride arrived, a line flight from Dallas to Chicago, with Danielle Carter once again in the jump seat. This time, though, the atmosphere was different. There was mutual respect, even if unspoken. He performed every step meticulously, and in moments of turbulence, he consulted with Trevor, verifying approach procedures and adjusting flight plans accordingly. Danielle observed, scribbling the occasional note. Landing in Chicago was smooth, a testament to skill fused with humility. After the passengers deplaned, Danielle remained in her seat, finalizing her notes. Mitchell felt a twist of nerves, but a calmer sort than before. He had done his best. Now he waited. When she finally looked up, her face conveyed neither anger nor pity, just a calm professionalism. "Captain Rourke, you've adhered to all required procedures. I'll be submitting my recommendation for your full reinstatement to the FAA and to Westward Air. Based on what I've seen, I have no further concerns about your performance." A wave of relief and gratitude washed over him. He nodded. "Thank you, Miss Carter." She offered a handshake. "Safe flights, Captain." Over the next few weeks, the final paperwork went through, and Mitchell officially regained full flying privileges. The ordeal had scarred his pride, but it also reshaped his entire perspective on aviation. In time, the rest of Westward Air's pilot corps accepted this new version of Mitchell, slightly humbler, more collaborative, and committed to following the rules instead of showcasing his ego. One evening, as Mitchell prepared for an early flight, he saw Danielle Carter at the airport. She was in the middle of an inspection of another crew, her posture poised and eyes sharp. He caught her eye and offered a cordial wave. She nodded in return. No words were exchanged, but the shared glance spoke volumes, mutual respect forged from conflict and resolution. Karma had indeed struck Mitchell, forcing him to confront his biases and his arrogance head-on. In losing his license temporarily, he found a renewed sense of responsibility that he had lost along the way. The pilot who once prided himself on fearless bravado was gone, replaced by one who understood that aviation excellence depended not on swagger, but on unyielding dedication to safety. His story became a cautionary tale among the younger pilots. Whenever someone boasted about cutting corners, Trevor or another colleague would say, "Remember Captain Rourke and the day the FAA inspector came aboard. There's no room for shortcuts in the sky." And so Mitchell Rourke flew on, not as a legend of daring landings and rumor-fueled heroics, but as a thoroughly professional, rule-abiding pilot who had learned the hard way that no one is above the system meant to keep everyone safe in the limitless expanse of the skies. Pride can be as treacherous as faulty instruments on a stormy night flight. Mitchell Rourke's story is a stark reminder that skill, without respect for procedure and the human beings around us, can lead to a crushing downfall. By failing to believe that anyone, let alone a dedicated black woman with vast flight experience, could hold him accountable, Mitchell nearly sacrificed everything he had worked for. Only when forced to face the limits of his arrogance did he learn what it truly means to be a reliable aviator. Let Mitchell's transformation inspire us all to stay open to learning, respect diverse perspectives, and uphold safety above ego. Now, if you enjoyed this dramatic tale and want more stories of real-life lessons, plot twists and awakenings, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's keep exploring new horizons together. Safe travels, everyone.